behalf of the 2023-20 On behalf of the 2023-2024 IPLE class, we would like to take a moment and On behalf of the 2023-2024 IPLE class, we would like to take a moment and thank you all for coming to today's debates. Before we continue on with the debates, we would like to remind all students to be respectful to the candidates and refrain from talking and using your phones and/or any other distractions during the debates. The structure of today's debates will proceed in the following format. We will hear from two debates today. The first will focus on a presidential age restriction. The speakers will be Bridget Skenyon from the Safari Party and Justin Ziering from the Snow Party. The second debate will focus on banning alcoholic and drug abusers from receiving organ donations. The speakers of this debate will be Corinne Basile from the Safari Party and Elizabeth Baxter from the Snow Party. Each speaker will have a total of 7 minutes to speak and answer questions. After each speaker presents their speech, the opposing speaker will have the opportunity to ask one question. After both speakers present their arguments, the audience will be allowed to ask 2 questions. After both debates have been completed, we will open up the floor to questions from the audience.
Ms. Skenyon, you have 7 minutes.
Teddy Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, Abraham Lincoln, Woodrow Wilson. What do they all have in common? Yes, they are all acknowledged as some of our nation's best leaders, but they share more than that. Not one of them was old enough to be your grandpa. All of the presidents I mentioned were under 60 years old at their inauguration. Teddy Roosevelt, the youngest president to be inaugurated, was shot and still delivered his intended speech. At the grand age of 81, Joe Biden can barely deliver a speech that someone else writes for him. Donald Trump can't even stay awake for his own trials. This is not an attack on parties. It's a problem our whole government is faced with. Good morning. My name is Bridget Skenyon, and I'm running for president in this year's elections. I think we all have noticed a trend within the federal government these past years. Whether we see our current president falling down the stairs at important government events, forgetting where he is, forgetting if he called a national emergency, or even mistakenly declaring his undying love for his sister. This not only looks bad for the Liberal Party, but the government as a whole. This cognitive decline is a result of his age. For this reason, I believe that our government should set a maximum age for a person running for president. The rule is simple. You cannot run at over 70 years old, and this rule will apply to the vice president as well. We have always had a minimum age requirement of 35 years old, so why is there not a maximum age? It is past time for a change. The other party will claim that this is an ageist policy, but it is a fact that brain cognition declines with age. Studies have shown that a person's brain is fully developed and at its peak at age 35. Furthermore, the National Institute of Health tells us the average age for cognitive decline is 70 years old. Based on these studies, the best age for a person to lead our country is from 35 to 70 years old. I propose exactly this. The presidency demands vitality and stamina to handle the rigorous responsibilities of leading this country. It requires the ability to think on the spot, to respond swiftly to crisis, and the cognitive ability to make decisions that will shape our nation. With the changing times, it is vital to have a president who can keep up with the technological advancements, global politics, and economic landscapes. By setting a maximum age for a presidential candidate, we can ensure that our leaders are seasoned by experience and relatable to the younger generation that will inherit this world. How many of you feel like the topics brought up in presidential elections directly affect you? Probably not many of you. The national youth voter turnout in the last election was 23%, as stated in a research conducted by Tufts University. Could this be because the people running for president are old men making decisions that will favor them and their peers? Joe Biden graduated high school in 1961. That same year, people were being imprisoned for being gay. Donald Trump graduated in 1963. That same year, people were marched the streets in advocating for civil rights. Do you think either of these old men can relate to us when they went to high school at a time when it was illegal to marry someone of a different race or gender, while segregation was the law of the land? A constantly evolving nation needs a leader who experiences these changes with us. We should have a president who will be around for the change that they are making, and who truly understands what it's like to be a part of the current times. Our government is so stacked with the elderly that the State of the Union address looks like visiting day at an assisted living community. Never before have we seen a presidential election like this. 4 years ago, Joe Biden was the oldest president in history to be inaugurated, and he's only getting older. With our primary party candidates enjoying senior citizen discounts for over a decade, it's time for government intervention. At a bare minimum, I think we all believe that our elected officials must be able to problem solve, self-monitor, make plans, and have an open mind. These skills are known as executive functioning. Executive functioning also includes a wide range of cognitive abilities such as the ability to organize, reason, problem solve, and successfully engage in independent, appropriate, purposive, and self-serving behavior. However, according to the National Institute of Health, concept formation, abstraction, and mental flexibility all decline after the age of 70. Older adults tend to think more concretely than younger adults, meaning seniors are less accepting of societal changes that will determine our future. Executive abilities requiring a speeded motor component are particularly susceptible to age effects. Our nation has never experienced this problem at this scale before. The median age of presidents at inauguration is 55 years old. It saddens me that the first election I'll get to vote in is one between an 81-year-old grandfather and a 77-year-old grandfather. Seeing these numbers, I had to think about the other 77 and 81-year-olds I know. I can't imagine letting my 76-year-old grandma walk up the stairs without offering my shoulder to support her, let alone envision her leading this nation. I think about all the old people I see at church or in public. I think about all the times I've been startled by some politically incorrect statement and told, "Don't mind him, he's just set in his ways," or "She comes from a different time." These excuses are universally used, so it's understood that old people think concretely. It baffles me that peers of these individuals whose inappropriate and offensive behavior we're constantly making excuses for are running for the highest office. That one of these men will be leading our nation. For these reasons, it is time for government intervention. It's time to pass legislation that prohibits people over the age of 70 from running for president. It's been a long time coming. There was already an age minimum requirement of 35, so it's time for a maximum. Based on cognitive studies, I believe the appropriate age limit is 70, also known as the age that the average brain starts to decline. It's a change that will be reasonably simple to implement, as there is already an age minimum in Article 2 of the Constitution. We just need to amend this to include an age maximum of 70. In conclusion, it is time for change. It's time to stop filling our government with the elderly. I hope in the future our government will represent us, the future of America. We must have a president who can think on the spot, who can have an open mind, and who has a cognitive ability to lead our nation. Don't take it from me, take it from science. Science has shown that a person's brain is best from age 35 to 70. Our president should be this age, not older, not younger. So please, vote for me as president in this election. Vote for a better future, vote for the youth, vote Safari.
Mr. Ziering, you may ask your question.
Thank you. You said you wanted to amend the Constitution. You're running for president. How do you expect 270 representatives, 67 senators, and 38 state legislatures all to vote in favor of this?
Oh, can I answer? So actually 79% of all Americans from both parties believe that this legislation is necessary. So I think it would honestly be fairly simple to get these votes in Congress because most people are in favor for it.
Mr. Ziering, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Justin Ziering, and I, alongside with my campaign manager, Ria Desai, am running for president with the Snow Party. I am an American citizen, and I understand that it is my right, just as it is yours, to vote for that office. I can vote for anyone I damn well please, so long as they are a natural-born citizen, have lived in this country for 14 years, and have lived for 35. While you or I may not agree with that criteria, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about my opponent's proposal to set a bar for how old you can be to be president. As far as I'm concerned, that just takes away power from the voter. If you like a candidate, if you like their policies, if you like their platforms, that should be an option that you can vote in. It just doesn't make sense to put a limit on how old someone can be. I can't see a reason why that would make sense. The oldness of a candidate shouldn't be a factor in considering how fit they are for office. Even if they should be mentally insufficient, there are checkpoints, there are safeguards against that crippling the country. The nominating process, all throughout the election year, you have all the debating and infighting within the parties to produce a candidate that the voters actually like, and then finally in November, the general election decides who the voters want to be president. But if that candidate happens to just be over the 70-year mark, that won't be an option. Even if someone does get elected and they end up being mentally insufficient, there is a mechanism in place for the cabinet to remove them. There is a set line of succession. Speaking of the cabinet, wouldn't this limitation have to apply to every member of the line of succession. Traditionally, the most senior member of the Senate has held the position of President pro tem out of honor and deference for their service. That tradition would have to be lost. They're the fourth person in line to succeeding the president, and if the president, God forbid, something happens to him, they would have to take the mantle. Every Speaker of the House, every President pro tem, every cabinet secretary would have to be below the 70-year mark. Representation of an entire demographic within government would just evaporate with the introduction of this limitation. What my opponent forgets is that the presidency isn't the Supreme Court. The presidency is the president, by virtue of our political system, is beholden to public opinion. The presidency is renewed every 4 years. If we vote in a guy that we don't like, we can just boot him out the next cycle. Representation and seniority aren't really issues. An elderly president can still have young members of his cabinet. I'm certain that he would. It's not as visible, but there is youth representation within the government. And when it comes to youth issues, it's not like someone can just ignore them. If they want to stay in office, if they want to win that office, then they have to recognize youth issues because young people can vote. In 1984, President Reagan was the oldest in history. However you feel about him, he was still an effective president for better or for worse. Age had nothing to do with his ability to execute the duties of office. According to Drs. Vivian Clayton and Elkonin Goldberg, wisdom actually does come with age. The reason someone older may take longer to think through something is because of how much information they're carrying around and how they have to sift through it. I don't mean to say that an elderly candidate is preferable to a younger one. I'm just trying to demonstrate that age shouldn't be a factor when we're considering the cognitive fitness of someone for that office. Continue on age, life expectancy has always and continues to increase. It's believed by some Harvard researchers that the first cohort has already been born who will live over an average of 100 years. If this is true, if this does continue, then this limitation would be a little presumptive. Americans would only have about the second third of their life to become president. That's a narrow window of 35 years. Continuing on the topic of life expectancy, women, statistically, live longer than men. If you set a limit on how old a presidential candidate can be, you would be disproportionately affecting more women than you would be men. As it stands right now, if this limitation were implemented, you would currently be making 4,321,578 more women ineligible for the office than you would be men. And I can guarantee that that number is going to increase as people continue to live longer. The way I see it, this proposed cap on how old a candidate can be is just a way to keep older people out of politics. And you know what? If you don't like elderly politicians, just don't vote them in. It's our votes that make up the government. This proposal is just another way to create a schism in the electorate, to create a them against us. But we shouldn't be thinking that way, because they are us. We're all Americans. I guarantee you that if this limitation were introduced, the elderly vote would decline, apathy would increase, and elderly issues are going to become neglected because that vote won't be necessary. And the people who are going to suffer for that are you. I can almost guarantee that everyone in this room will one day collect a social security check. You better pray it holds enough to support you in your elderly years. One way to ensure that it might is to ensure that the elderly voice is still heard today. Keep an America where we don't see each other by ages, but by content of character. Keep an America where we all see each other as Americans. Go all in with Justin, vote no.
Ms. Scannion, you may ask your question.
I was just wondering, since you don't believe in the science that supports an age cap, do you also not believe in an age restriction since it's supported using the same science? Furthermore, do you believe that I should be able to run for president after graduation, and do I have your vote?
Okay, so we're not really talking about the age requirement, but I'll entertain it. If someone, say, is really educated in something, like let's say you graduate top of your class from Columbia Business, you're not just going to walk into a CEO position at a Fortune 500 company. You need to prove yourself in practice. If you're really good on paper, that doesn't necessarily mean you'll be good in practice. It's important that a presidential candidate have experience. And I'm not saying that I support the age minimum, but since that's something you're asking, and yeah, you would have my vote.
Thank you.
We'll have 2 questions from the audience.
Okay. If studies show that a person is cognitively primed from 37 to 35
Who's your
to
question
70,
for?
No, sorry. If studies show that a person is cognitively primed from 35 to 70, isn't that the window that our president should be?
Not necessarily. I think that there's certainly that's certainly an average that, the NAST, whatever statistics she brought up, but we're not exactly voting on average people. We're voting on exceptional people. We want exceptional people in office, and if that person happens to be over the age of 70, then they should still be an option for voters.
We'll take one more question from the audience.
This is a question for the Safari Party. If you're planning on putting on an age limit, what do you plan for presidents who during their term will age over this 70-year limit?
Okay. So
Decorum.
that's a great question, and when I met with Justin to go over the terms of this, we did decide that they could run for president and get inaugurated at 70, so they can be 74 when they leave office. So it's not going to be like they have to boot out when they turn 70. It's just you can't be initially inaugurated once you are over 70 years old.
We would now like to invite the next speakers up to the podiums. Ms. Basile, you have 7 minutes.
Need an organ? No problem. You get a heart, you get a liver, you get a lung. Everybody gets an organ. This is how the transplant process would work in a perfect world. But ladies and gentlemen, I am not Oprah Winfrey. Organs are not giveaway cars, and it is simply not that easy. Over 100,000 people in the United States are currently waiting desperately for an organ transplant. Every 9 minutes, another is added to that list. And every day, 17 people on that list will die waiting for an organ to become available. This tragic cycle will continue until you, as the American people, vote in favor to reform this broken system. Hi, my name is Corinne Basile, and I am running for the House of Representatives alongside my campaign manager, Bridget Duffy, in favor of the Safari Party. Let's discuss a little about the process of receiving an organ and what it is really like. Our current legislation comes from the National Transplant Act, created in 1984, which established the United Network for Organ Sharing, which oversees the collection, allocation, and distribution of organs to matched recipients. So here's the problem. According to the Federal Register, the purpose of adopted legislation was to establish an equal distribution of organ donations for patients who are medically qualified. But currently, each transplant center follows its own set of rules. Now you may be wondering, how do they decide who is qualified to begin with? Well, the Community Ethics Committee is the group of professionals who are responsible for deciding who is eligible to receive an organ. As of now, there are so many factors that contribute to their decision that reducing this eligibility criteria would make this process much more efficient. Recently, the Ethics Committee reported that they aspire to standardize the criteria by reducing it. So the best way to simplify this selection process is to start by eliminating drug abusers and alcoholics from the eligibility criteria. I know what you may be thinking, But this change is not a personal attack on those who have struggled with addiction. Addicts are not being excluded as retribution for their actions. When the CEC decides on people who abide by this psychosocial criteria, they do not have any access to the patient's personal stories or any details of their addiction. We acknowledge that addiction is a disease, as overconsumption changes the brain chemistry. Addiction is extremely dependent on a person's environment, family history, and many other contributing factors. It is true that many people who have struggled with addiction in the past have successfully received a transplant. But the concern at large is that we need to put our best foot forward and give organs to the best matched candidates. As a whole, addicts struggle to meet the psychosocial criteria because of the type of disease they face. How many people in here have ever gotten into a bad habit like biting their nails and it feels like you just can't stop? Then you quit for a while and you forget about it until you do it again one day and it's like you never stopped. This is what's happening throughout the course of an addiction. An addict's brain builds irreversible pathways that create a permanent aversive mental state, according to the National Library of Medicine. This is problematic because after you receive an organ, your body naturally detects that the organ is not yours and feels as though it needs to be eliminated, kind of like it would attack an infection. This is called rejection. There are a variety of drugs that prevent the body from entering rejection. These pills must be taken several times a day, as it is quite literally a matter of life and death. This discipline is difficult for someone who has chemically altered their brain to allow control over their body. It is also imperative that these drugs are not improperly mixed, as they can quickly turn deadly. Although not impossible, it is scientifically established that addicts are at a higher risk of transplant failure. Now, this risk may not seem like that big of a deal, but with how scarce organs really are, we have to put our best foot forward with organ recipients. Once again, there are over 100,000 people currently waiting on this list, and we just cannot keep up. In 2023, there were 46,632 organ transplants, according to the HRSA. This is less than half of the people that wait by the phone every day, hoping their second chance will come. Not to mention, the span these organs can survive outside the body does not leave much time for debate. Lungs only last 4 to 6 hours. A liver lasts on average 8 hours. In other words, the time span of a school day, if not less, to make a life-saving decision. Currently, 1/3 of transplants in the United States fail. Transplants can have many complications, but we must also factor in that we are not giving organs to the best candidates available. For the leaders in Western medicine, this is an absurd amount. With all of these constraining factors, it is imperative that this list must be cut down to those with the greatest chance of survival. Ladies and gentlemen, the clock is ticking. From the time you came in here this morning to the end of this speech, another person has died at the hands of an empty promise we could not fulfill. My opposition is going to allow this system to rob thousands of people from their last chance of survival. Like I said, I am not Oprah Winfrey, and I only have 2 kidneys, 2 lungs, 1 liver, and 1 heart. As much as I would love to, I cannot solve this issue alone. But together, we can make sustainability a reality. Thank you.
Ms. Baxter, you may ask your question.
The Eighth Amendment of the Constitution protects its citizens from cruel and unusual punishment. Under the 14th Amendment, no state can deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. By denying a person life-saving medical treatment, would you say this violates either the Eighth Amendment, because it is punishing a person to death because of their past mistakes, or the 14th Amendment? After all, you're denying treatment due to a genetically predisposed disorder.
Thank you for your question. So this does not violate either amendment on accounts that this is just medical criteria. This is something that we simply cannot sustain right now. And as I mentioned in my speech, this isn't account of anything that has to do with their previous mistakes, We just have to put our best foot forward and qualify those who have the best chance of survival with the little organs we have. It's not a punishment for their past retributions. It's simply making do with what we have. Thank you.
Ms. Baxter, you have 7 minutes.
My name is Elizabeth Baxter, and alongside my campaign manager, Purva Munjal, I am running for the House of Representatives with the Snow Party. Organ donation has a rich history, dating back to 1968. Over the years, the regulation and innovation of this system have been under strict scrutiny. Today, we are specifically talking about whether addicts deserve organs. My opponent says no, but I say yes. Every human deserves the right to live, and more importantly, a second chance. Before I hit the hard stuff, I want to make sure that everyone here has a clear foundation of how organ donation works. In broad terms, the entire system is overseen by the Organ Procurement and Transplantation Network, or OPTN. They are in charge of the compensation and organization of the U.S. donor system. Along with the OPTN, a private nonprofit organization called UNOS assists in the organ donation process. I'm sure that many of you have heard of UNOS from Grey's Anatomy or Chicago Med. Essentially, UNOS is contracted to further oversee the specifics involving organ donation. They organize the USA into 11 geographical regions. In case you were wondering, we fall into Region 2. These regions can be further divided into donation service areas, or DSAs. When an organ is available, UNOS first looks for matches in the DSA, then the region, and then the rest of the country. The order of priority for organs is based on medical urgency. This is all important. When organ donation first started, the medical community was not nearly as technologically advanced. You all need to remember that there is a significant portion of time between extraction and transplantation. The organ must therefore be kept safe, alive, and healthy for that entire journey. Due to this, we prioritize location. And if there is an addict in a DSA, they should get it because it's safer and more reliable. Moving forward, I know that a lot of you aren't interested in the boring and complicated system of transplantation, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, this is a moral argument. So let's look at the morals. Ms. Basile will say that alcoholics did this to themselves, and that this is self-inflicted. The self-infliction argument focuses on two main factors. The first is casual certainty. How sure are we that this disease is the result of the patient's behavior? For example, how many of you like to tan? I personally love the sun, as I'm sure you can see by my glowing complexion. But if in 20 years I'm diagnosed with melanoma, was it my fault? It's easy to point the blame, but in reality, there are so many causes of skin cancer that you could never know. Cocaine and amphetamines are known to cause heart attacks and renal failure, but it's impossible to know for sure that the heart attack was the result of cocaine. The second factor of self-infliction is choice autonomy. Were these behaviors deliberate or a result of environmental, genetic, and socioeconomic factors? I'm sorry to all the anti-alcoholics out there, but alcoholism checks all three boxes. Alcoholism, smoking, and obesity are more common in poverty. Any law implemented that discriminates against alcoholics would be discriminating against the poor and therefore further emphasizing the split between the rich and the poor. Even more importantly, drinking is considered a societal norm. It's encouraged. Just look at the media. Have you ever watched Gossip Girl? They sure love their alcohol. College partying, high school partying. I mean, the fact that we have to sit through assemblies about underage drinking should tell you how much of a problem it is. And that environment is triggering. Alcoholism is officially classified as a genetic disease. Several genetic tags prove that it runs in families and that it cannot be controlled. Then comes the argument, well, if they knew that they have the markers, why do they drink? Drinking is practically forced down your throat from when you're 16 on. If you want a promotion, go out for drinks with your boss. How to break up? Drinking is the solution. Getting married? Let's drink to celebrate. Someone died? Let's drink out of grief and regret. With how encouraged drinking is in society, it's no wonder that half of all liver transplants are needed by former alcoholics. You get the idea. Addiction and alcoholism are not self-inflicted. Most alcoholics don't have a choice, and that's why they need professional help to stop, because they can't do it alone. Another common misconception is that former alcoholics and addicts will simply relapse, i.e., we're feeding the addiction. This is the farthest thing from the truth that you can get. First of all, you have to be sober for at least 6 months to even make it on the donor list. The 6 months commitment proves that they will most likely not relapse. In the first 3 weeks to 4 months of sobriety, there's a 60% chance of relapse. After a year, it goes down to 20%, and by the second year, it's less than 10. Even more importantly, a study found that between 6 months and 3 years after transplant operations, a small 9% of their alcoholics patients had returned to drinking at a level systematic of alcoholism. Only 14% reported some alcohol consumption. By comparison, 46% of non-alcoholic groups of liver transplant patients reported drinking socially. The survival rates between alcoholics and non-alcoholics have no significant difference. Wait a minute, are you all hearing what I'm hearing? Because I'm hearing that there's absolutely no medical basis to deny care to former alcoholics. In fact, alcoholics were found to be taking better care of their organs. And just hear me out here. There's an oath that doctors pledge when they graduate from medical school called the Hippocratic Oath. Some of you may have heard of it. To summarize, doctors pledge to never cause harm and to help all people in need without discrimination. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I do believe that denying a person life-saving medical care because of a genetically predisposed disorder that is emphasized by society and shows a heavy correlation to poverty does in fact break that oath. Really think about it. Look deep into the big hearts that I know you all have, and imagine if you weren't allowed to graduate because you got a D in a class back in middle school when you were younger. Now imagine that that one inconsequential decision cost you your life. That's the fate that you are relegating former alcoholics and addicts to if you side with Miss Basile. Think on that, and remember, snow lands on top and Baxter's got your back.
Ms. Basile, you may ask your question.
How do you suggest going about a reformation of this overcrowded list if you believe addicts should remain candidates, or do you believe the thousands of people dying a day at the hands of an unorganized system is sustainable?
I don't think that the system is unorganized today. In fact, there's a lot of medical basis for how the system is currently organized in terms of urgency. They look at many different factors, and alcoholism, obesity, all of these different things are considered into it. So they're not just placing somebody who won't take care of the organ at the top. They're placing at the top of the list the healthiest candidate who closest genetically matches. Those matches are really hard to come by, and that's why there are so many deaths. Not because of the candidates on the list, but because the genetic likelihood of matching is so low.
All right, we'll have 2 questions from the audience. Just a reminder, please state who your question is for.
This is for Corinne. Are you concerned with disproportionately affecting certain groups from receiving organ transplants? For example, 10.7% of Native Americans deal with alcohol use disorder. Are you saying they're ineligible now?
Thank you. Yes, if you suffer from alcoholism or a recovering alcoholic, or suffer from drug abuse or a recovering drug abuser, then no matter what group you're from, yes, you are just. It is unfortunately, yes, it is disproportionately affecting some racial groups, but we disqualify people from the list every day disproportionately. Impoverished groups that are exposed to unhealthy drinking water oftentimes face liver disease. This greatly affects the African American population. We disclose them, or we disinclude them every single day. This is also disproportionate. Unfortunately, it is the reality, and once we get more organized, and once we have access to more transplants and more surgeries and more organs, hopefully this will be fixed in the future. But as for now, we're hurting everybody as a group by not doing anything.
We will now take one more question.
So my question is for the Snow Party. In your speech, you started off mentioning how there are assemblies for underage anti-drinking, and there are also, as we know, rehab centers for people who are recovering. or need help staying sober. But then later on in your speech, you started to mention how drinking is encouraged by the general public and peers. So I just wanted clarification, because if there are these assemblies and programs to help people stop drinking, it doesn't sound like it's very encouraged.
The school districts and the media are two completely different sources, and I would say that as a group, we tend to listen to one more than the other. So just because it's not encouraged by the school district itself doesn't mean that it's not encouraged by the media. And I think that's very obvious if you watch any teen show.
We would like to invite all speakers and campaign managers up to the stage to open up the floor for questions.
If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand. Oh. Please raise your hand, and a microphone runner will come over to you.
My question is for the Safaris team. If alcoholism is encouraged by the media, why is it that alcoholism is so badly conflicted, or why is it that alcoholism is so bad for the body, but everybody uses alcoholism?
No. Thank you for your question. It's a good question. So I know my opposition speech kind of went a little back and forth. So casual drinking, encouragement of the media drinking is not alcoholism. If you partied in high school and drank with your boss, you do not qualify as an alcoholic. So alcohol is not good for the body. And becoming an alcoholic and giving your brain the ability to take over your body, we don't think aligns well with the care you need to give your body after you get an organ donation. So that's the reason that we decided that alcoholics are the first candidate that should not be qualified for this list. Thank you.
My question is for Justin. You said you would vote for Bridget, so why should we vote for you?
Why didn't... Is it? All right. Well, why wouldn't you? I can have my own opinions. I don't think necessarily that it's always a good thing to vote for myself. I don't really think of myself... I'm not going to continue on that train of thought, but I do. I think you should vote for me because I think my arguments were correct, and I think that they are my position is the better side, and I can't vote for her because she's. You know what? It doesn't even matter. That had nothing to do with what we're talking about. So, I'm sorry.
Decorum.
My question is for Justin. How do you justify risking the health of our nation by allowing for people with declining cognitive abilities to lead our country?
Well, as I mentioned, it's not so much that I'm saying that these people should be in office. I'm just saying that we should have the option to put these people in office. If someone that is older is someone that the people like, then they should be able to vote that person in. And if they do somehow begin to become cognitively unfit, as I mentioned, there are safeguards in place. The cabinet can remove them from office. The cabinet can take their position and replace them with the vice president and the speaker if it just keeps going. So I'm not saying that we should be putting these people in office. I'm just saying that we should have the choice to do so, if that makes sense.
We have time for one more question.
This question is also for Justin. Like you said, we as younger people should just vote for people who have our interests in mind, aka like other younger people. But the problem with that is, as people start to live longer, like the younger people just get pushed out. So how are we expected to vote for the people that we want if we're just gonna get pushed out?
Thank you. I'm not necessarily saying that we as younger people should be voting for younger politicians. I'm saying we should have the choice to vote for who we want to. And a younger politician, if that's who you want to vote for, then you should be able to. Just as you should be able to if you want an older politician. And I'm not saying that people won't have our interests in mind. I'm saying that every politician has to have our interests in mind because we can vote. So no matter how old a candidate is, they're going to have to address youth issues.
We would like to thank you all for coming today. Voting will commence Monday.